After 27 years of dedicated service, my boss fired me just 11 days before my retirement bonus kicked in. "No bonus for old folk," he said, sliding the severance agreement across his mahogany desk. "Sign by Friday or get nothing." I thanked him politely and left his office with a calm smile. But that night, I made one devastating phone call that would bring his entire company to its knees. My name is Richard Thompson, and I'm 58 years old. For nearly 3 decades, I've been the backbone of Global Tech Solutions' IT infrastructure. I started as a junior programmer fresh out of college, working my way up to senior systems architect. I built every major system this company relies on: the customer database, the security protocols, the backup servers, even the coffee machine's Wi-Fi connection. Most nights, I'd work until 2 in the morning when critical systems failed. My colleagues would joke that I lived at the office, but it wasn't funny anymore. Last Tuesday, I came home to find my wife, Margaret, already asleep, a travel brochure for European cruises on her nightstand. She'd circled a 2-week Mediterranean voyage in red ink with a note: "Our retirement adventure. Only 11 days left." I stood in our bedroom doorway, watching her peaceful breathing, knowing she'd been planning this trip for months. She'd saved every penny from her part-time job at the library, dreaming of visiting Rome and Paris together. Finally, she'd whispered the night before, "We'll have time for each other again." The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was building digital fortresses to protect $50 million in customer data, my own family felt like strangers. My daughter Sarah had booked us a surprise anniversary cruise, calling last week with excitement. "Dad, I put down a $5,000 deposit. I hope your bonus covers it. It's non-refundable." But here's what nobody at Global Tech knew. While upgrading their legacy systems last month, I discovered a massive security vulnerability in their old infrastructure, a backdoor that could expose every client's sensitive information. I'd kept quiet about it, planning to fix it completely after my retirement bonus secured my family's future. Sometimes the right thing to do requires careful timing. My relationship with our new CEO, Marcus Stevens, had started promisingly enough. At 35, he brought energy and ambitious vision to the company. "Richard," he'd said during his first week, "your experience is invaluable. We need institutional knowledge like yours." But lately, his tone had shifted. Every conversation now included buzzwords like innovation, young blood, and modernizing our approach. Have you ever felt like you've given your entire youth to a company only to watch them treat you like an outdated piece of equipment? The warning signs should have been obvious. Last month, Marcus had started scheduling strategic meetings that somehow never included me. "This is for department heads only," he'd explain, despite my role overseeing all critical systems. The excuse felt hollow, especially when I'd built half the strategies they were discussing. Then came the email that changed everything. At 11 p.m. on a Wednesday, marked urgent: "Richard, meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Bring all access codes and system documentation." That first betrayal happened during our quarterly review meeting. I'd spent weeks developing a comprehensive cloud migration strategy that would save the company $200,000 annually. The presentation went perfectly, until Marcus interrupted. "This is exactly the kind of fresh thinking we need," he announced to the room. "Great work, team." Team? I'd worked alone on this project for 6 weeks, but suddenly it belonged to everyone except me. When I tried to clarify my role, Marcus waved dismissively. "We need to move past legacy thinking, Richard. Collaboration is key. That evening, I called my 82-year-old mother from the hospital parking lot. She'd been waiting for hip replacement surgery, and insurance would only cover 60%. "Richard, honey," she said weakly, "I know you're busy, but the surgery costs $30,000. I've been saving. But—" Her voice trailed off. "Mom, don't worry about money," I assured her. "My retirement bonus will cover everything. Just focus on getting better." But Marcus's attitude toward me was changing rapidly. Where he'd once sought my input on major decisions, now he'd say things like, "We need to modernize our approach," whenever I spoke up. During team meetings, younger employees would present ideas I'd suggested weeks earlier, receiving praise while I sat invisible. The breaking point came when I discovered Marcus was secretly recruiting for a chief technology officer position, essentially my job with a fancier title. The salary posting showed $180,000, nearly double what I earned after 27 years of service. The job description read like my current responsibilities, but with requirements like energetic, innovative thinker, and digital native. Code words that screamed age discrimination. My longtime assistant, Jessica, who'd worked with me for 10 years, suddenly became unavailable. "Sorry, Richard, I have a meeting with Marcus," became her standard response. Even Tom, a junior developer I'd mentored from day one, started avoiding eye contact during lunch breaks. On my 58th birthday, I found myself eating a convenience store cupcake alone in the cafeteria. Margaret had texted earlier, "Happy birthday, honey. 11 days left until freedom." But freedom felt increasingly uncertain. Have you ever felt like you've become invisible at 50 plus? Like your decades of experience suddenly became a liability instead of an asset? The choice seemed impossible. Confront Marcus directly and risk immediate termination, or stay silent and hope to reach retirement intact. But silence felt like betraying every older worker who'd ever been pushed aside for fresh blood. Then I overheard the phone call that changed everything. Walking past Marcus's office after hours, I heard him speaking quietly. "Yes, we can cut $200,000 from the budget by Friday. The plan is already in motion." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The recruitment, the attitude shift, the strategic exclusions. It hadn't been coincidental. It had been calculated. My worst fears were confirmed when I accidentally accessed an email thread that should have been confidential. The subject line read, "Cost Optimization Initiative," and the contents made my blood run cold. HR Director Sharon Wilson had written, "We need a younger team. Richard costs too much with pension obligations." Marcus's reply was even worse. "Fire him before the bonus vests. Save the company $150,000. But Marcus wasn't the mastermind I'd assumed. Deeper in the email chain, I found communications from the board of directors. This wasn't personal vendetta. It was corporate strategy. "Phase out expensive senior employees," read one directive. "Optimize human resources for maximum ROI." That night, I sat in my car in our driveway for 20 minutes, unable to face Margaret's excited chatter about retirement plans. When I finally went inside, she was spread across the kitchen table with brochures and itineraries. "Look, honey, I found this perfect little bistro in Tuscany where we can have lunch." I wrapped my arms around her from behind, burying my face in her silver hair. "Do you remember our honeymoon 30 years ago?" I whispered. "Of course. That little bed and breakfast in Vermont. You said we'd travel the world someday when we had time and money." "We will," I promised, though I wasn't sure how. The next morning brought devastating revelations. Hidden in the company's shared drive, I found a folder labeled Performance Documentation, filled with fabricated reports about my work. They documented tardiness for arriving 5 minutes late due to traffic. They'd noted technology resistance for skipping training sessions about software completely unrelated to my department. Every minor incident had been magnified and recorded, building a case for termination. Even worse, I discovered I wasn't alone. 12 other employees over 50 had similar documentation files, names I recognized, good people, dedicated workers who'd given their best years to this company. This wasn't about performance. It was systematic age discrimination disguised as corporate efficiency. The most heartbreaking moment came when Sharon Wilson, the HR director, approached me in the parking garage. At 55, she looked exhausted and defeated. "Richard," she whispered, tears in her eyes, "I'm so sorry. They're forcing me to do this. If I don't comply, they'll fire me too," she continued. "I have 2 kids in college, and my husband's been unemployed for 8 months. I can't afford to take a stand." I understood her position, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. The system had turned potential allies into reluctant executioners, each person too scared for their own survival to protect others. That evening, my daughter called with devastating timing. "Dad, I have wonderful news. I surprised Mom and booked your anniversary cruise for next month. It's going to be perfect. A real celebration of your retirement." Her excitement was infectious and heartbreaking. "The deposit was $5,000, but it's worth it. I know your bonus will cover everything." How could I tell her that bonus might never come? How could I explain that her generous gesture might become another financial burden instead of a celebration? The psychological toll was becoming unbearable. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping yesterday had been a nightmare. But walking into that office, seeing Marcus's fake smile, and feeling my colleague's awkward distance confirmed the harsh reality. Have you ever watched your life's work being systematically dismantled while being told it's for the good of the company? The moral dilemma intensified daily. I could accept the injustice quietly, take whatever severance they offered, and try to rebuild at 58. Or I could fight back, knowing that resistance might cost me everything, including the ability to help my mother with her surgery. But as I lay awake that third night, staring at the ceiling while Margaret slept peacefully beside me, I realized something crucial. Accepting this treatment wouldn't just harm me. It would validate their tactics against every other older worker in the company. My silence would become complicity in systematic discrimination. The next morning, Marcus scheduled a meeting that would change everything. His email was ominously brief. "Richard, we need to discuss your transition plan. Conference room B, 9 a.m. tomorrow." I knew this was the end, but I also knew it was the beginning of something else. That night, I began preparing my own transition plan, one that Marcus and his board would never see coming. As I sat in my home office, surrounded by 27 years of performance reviews, commendations, and project documentation, I started making a list, not of what I'd lost, but of what I knew. Every system, vulnerability, every critical process, every piece of institutional knowledge that walked out the door with me. They thought they were eliminating an expensive employee. They had no idea they were about to lose the architect of their entire digital infrastructure. And tomorrow, they'd learn the difference between age and experience the hard way. The phone call I'd make after that meeting would demonstrate something Marcus's generation had forgotten. In technology, as in life, there's no substitute for knowing where all the bodies are buried. The media explosion began at 6 a.m. Tuesday morning. Age discrimination scandal, rocks tech giant, blazed across the Washington Post's front page. By noon, CNN was running my story as breaking news, and my phone hadn't stopped ringing for 12 hours straight. Margaret found me in the kitchen, staring at my laptop screen in disbelief. "Honey, you're trending on LinkedIn," she said, her voice filled with awe. 50,000 shares in 6 hours. All my book club friends are calling you a hero. The domino effect was more devastating than I'd imagined. Global Tech's customer service system crashed completely. I'd built their entire ticketing infrastructure from scratch. Data backups were failing across multiple servers because only I understood the recovery protocols for the legacy systems. Security breaches were popping up everywhere as automated patches I'd designed stopped functioning. But the real twist came when hundreds of other older workers began sharing their stories. My case had opened a floodgate. Sarah Chen, a 54-year-old marketing director from Seattle, posted her termination letter. David Rodriguez, 56, shared emails proving his company had systematically excluded senior employees from promotions. Within 48 hours, age discrimination was trending nationally, with thousands of stories pouring in. Marcus called 17 times that first day. When I finally answered, his voice was barely controlled panic. "Richard, please, name your price. We'll make you CTO immediately. The board will approve anything. Just please come back." "I appreciate the offer, Marcus," I replied calmly. "But didn't you say you needed fresh blood and young energy? I wouldn't want my legacy thinking to hold you back." The silence on the other end lasted 10 seconds before he hung up. By Wednesday, the Department of Labor had launched a formal investigation. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission filed a federal lawsuit citing systematic age discrimination affecting potentially hundreds of workers. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced they were reviewing Global Tech's cost optimization documents for securities fraud. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, advocacy groups. But the call that surprised me most came from my granddaughter Emma. "Grandpa?" Her 8-year-old voice bubbled with excitement. "Mommy says you're on TV fighting bad guys. Are you really a superhero?" "Not a superhero, sweetheart," I laughed. "Just someone who decided to stand up when it mattered." The financial impact was staggering. Global Tech's stock dropped 23% in the first week. 40% of their major clients signed with Technova Solutions, my new company, within 72 hours. $12 million in contracts were canceled as news of the discrimination scandal spread. Other tech companies began panicking, hastily reviewing their own age demographics. Google announced an Experience Diversity Initiative by Friday. Microsoft quietly settled 3 age discrimination cases that had been pending for months. The entire industry was scrambling to avoid becoming the next Global Tech. But the most satisfying moment came when my mother called from her hospital bed. "Richard, honey, the news said you're fighting for older people like me. I'm so proud of you." Her surgery had been successful, paid for by Technova's signing bonus, and she was recovering beautifully. The board of directors held emergency meetings daily. Marcus was under enormous pressure, his job hanging by a thread. Legal counsel David Kim warned them they faced $50 million in potential lawsuits. This isn't just about Richard Thompson anymore, he told them. This has become a federal case with criminal implications. Have you ever watched a single act of courage inspire thousands of others to find their own voice? The scope kept expanding. By Thursday, the FBI called with news that made my head spin. Mr. Thompson, Agent Sarah Chen explained, we've uncovered evidence of systematic document fraud. Global Tech isn't the only company involved. We're looking at potential criminal charges. Friday brought the news that changed everything. Congressional hearings were announced. The House Committee on Education and Labor would investigate age discrimination in corporate America, and I was invited as the key witness. This had grown far beyond my personal battle. The weekend brought an unexpected visitor. I was in the backyard, teaching Emma how to code on an old laptop, when Margaret called from the front door. Richard, someone's here to see you. Marcus Stevens stood on my porch, but he looked nothing like the confident CEO who'd fired me. Unshaven, wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, he appeared to have aged 5 years and 2 weeks. My security camera had caught him sitting in his car for 20 minutes before working up the courage to knock. Margaret was nervous. Should I call the police? She whispered. Let him in, I decided. This needs to end properly. Emma hid behind my legs as Marcus entered our living room. The contrast was stark. Our comfortable family home filled with grandchildren's artwork and Margaret's garden flowers, while this broken man sat across from me, fidgeting with his wedding ring. Richard, he began, his voice cracking, I came to apologize and to tell you the truth. What followed was a confession that reframed everything. Marcus revealed he'd been under enormous pressure from the board of directors. They told me to modernize or be replaced, he said, tears forming. I had 3 kids in private school, a mortgage on our family home, and my wife's medical bills from her cancer treatment last year. The most shocking revelation: my own father was fired at 59 from his engineering job. I watched it destroy him. I swore I'd never let that happen to anyone else. But when my own job was threatened, he broke down completely. Marcus wasn't the villain I'd imagined. He was another victim of a system that pitted economic survival against moral principles. But that didn't excuse the harm he'd caused to 200 families. There's something else, he continued, pulling out a USB drive. Evidence of board communications. This proves systematic conspiracy across multiple companies. Venture capital firms have been pressuring portfolio companies for age optimization industry-wide. Emma's innocent voice broke the tension. Why is the sad man crying, Grandpa? Sometimes adults make mistakes, sweetheart. I explained gently. The important thing is what they do to fix them. Marcus offered me a conditional truce. Help me testify against the board and the real architects of this system. Your lawsuit will succeed, and we can change how the entire industry treats experienced workers. But before I could answer, Margaret spotted something through our front window that made her gasp. Richard, there's an FBI surveillance van across the street. That's when I revealed the truth that would shock Marcus completely. Marcus, I said quietly, that devastating phone call I made after you fired me. It wasn't to a competitor or a lawyer. It was to FBI agent Sarah Chen. I've been working with federal investigators for 3 months, collecting evidence of systematic age discrimination. His face went white as I continued. The nuclear option I triggered wasn't sabotage or revenge. It was a coordinated federal investigation involving multiple agencies. Everything that's happened was planned to maximize impact and create lasting change. Margaret smiled knowingly. I wondered why you'd been so calm through all this. Married 30 years, I recognize your righteous anger planning mode. The full scope of my strategy emerged. The 200 age-discriminated workers weren't coincidental. I'd been building that network for months. The class action lawsuit was prepared before I was even fired. The media coverage was coordinated with the Washington Post's investigative team. Even the timing of my termination was strategic, designed to create maximum public outrage. But why show me mercy now? Marcus asked, confused. You could have destroyed me personally. Because the system is the enemy, I explained, not the people trapped in it. You have children to feed and a conscience to live with. Help us expose the real architects of this discrimination, and you can spend the rest of your career fixing what you helped break. Marcus's cooperation proved invaluable. Within days, his testimony revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Board communications showed systematic coordination with other companies. Venture capital firms had been pressuring portfolio companies to implement workforce optimization strategies targeting older employees. The Netflix documentary crew arrived on Tuesday. The Last Call, How One Phone Call Changed American Workplace, would chronicle not just my story, but the hundreds of families affected by systematic age discrimination. My case became the centerpiece of a national movement for workplace dignity. Congressional testimony preparation consumed my evenings. Age discrimination is economic terrorism against American families, I practiced saying. It destroys decades of loyal service and wastes the wisdom our society desperately needs. But the most meaningful moment came during a family dinner with all the affected workers and their families. 200 people gathered in the community center, sharing stories of resilience and hope. Children played, while grandparents discussed new job opportunities. This was what real community looked like. You know, I told Margaret that night, I thought I was fighting for a retirement bonus. I was actually fighting for the future of work in America. 6 months later, life at 58 looked completely different than I'd imagined. Technova Solutions had made me their chief technology officer with a salary of $220,000, more than I'd ever earned. But the real satisfaction came from leading their Wisdom and Innovation department, which specifically recruited experienced workers. Experience is our competitive advantage, CEO Janet Morrison announced at the all-hands meeting. Richard's team brings institutional knowledge that can't be taught in coding boot camps. For the first time in 30 years, I took Margaret to lunch on a Tuesday afternoon. Honey, she laughed, I'd forgotten what your voice sounds like during daylight hours. The Gray Justice Foundation became my passion project, a non-profit providing legal aid and job placement services for age-discriminated workers. The $47 million class action settlement funded operations, though I donated my personal portion. Justice isn't about money, I explained to reporters. It's about respect and dignity. Marcus's transformation was remarkable. After testifying in 15 additional age discrimination cases, he became a corporate ethics consultant. Richard showed me who I wanted to be, he said during his first speaking engagement. I'm spending the rest of my career undoing the damage I helped cause. The Congressional Age Discrimination Reform Act passed with bipartisan support. I was invited to the White House signing ceremony, standing behind the president as he made age discrimination a federal crime with enhanced penalties. "Your courage changed American workplace law," he told me privately. The ripple effects were global. The European Union passed an age discrimination directive citing my case. Japan implemented silver worker protection laws. Corporate America began viewing experienced employees as assets rather than liabilities. Emma's school presentation made me cry. "My grandpa is a real superhero," she told her third-grade class. "He fights for people who can't fight for themselves. He taught me that one person standing up can change the whole world." The documentary won an Emmy for Best Documentary Feature. 50 million Americans watched my story, and international screenings reached 15 countries. Age discrimination complaints dropped 60% nationally as the Thompson test became standard corporate practice. But the most important victory happened every evening in our living room. Teaching Emma to code, I'd tell her, "Technology serves people, not the other way around. Never forget that behind every system, there are human beings who matter." My book, The Last Call, How One Phone Call Changed American Workplace, became a bestseller for 47 weeks. All proceeds funded legal aid for age discrimination victims. MBA programs began teaching the Thompson case study as a masterclass in ethical leadership and systemic change. On Christmas Day, surrounded by our extended family of 200 affected workers and their children, I looked around the community center and felt complete satisfaction. Kids played, while grandparents shared stories of new beginnings. Former Global Tech employees compared notes about their thriving new careers. Marcus approached me during dinner, now employed as the Gray Justice Foundation's Director of Corporate Relations. "Richard, I need to thank you again. You could have destroyed my life, but instead, you gave me purpose." "Everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing," I replied. The final vindication came when Global Tech, now under new leadership, implemented age-diverse hiring policies and became an industry leader in inclusive workplace practices. They invited me back as a consultant, but I politely declined. Some bridges are better left in the past. Margaret found me on our back porch that evening, watching Emma and her cousins play in the snow. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me. "I was thinking about that phone call," I said. "Everyone assumes it was about revenge, but it was really about hope. Hope that one person's courage could inspire others. Hope that standing up for what's right still matters." She squeezed my hand. "And it did matter. Look around. You didn't just change your own life. You changed the lives of thousands of people you'll never meet." As the evening settled around us, I realized the truth about endings and beginnings. That devastating phone call hadn't destroyed anything. It had revealed what was already broken and created space for something better. My final thought, as Emma ran up to hug me goodnight, was simple. Sometimes the ending of one story is just the beginning of a much better one. And sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, the whole world stands up with you.